Marxism and communism will always be appealing to a lot of people because it gives you this utopia vision that everything will be fixed, that the world is full of oppression and full of exploitation, and we have something else that can fix the problem. But I think just forget about economics or culture, whatever. The best way to understand communism and Marxism is it is all about power. It is about totalitarianism.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We've got a special guest today, author and communism survivor. Is it Z Van Fleet? Is it Z? It's always Z, right? Chi with like CHI sounded American.
SHE, kind of like a pronoun. Okay. My pronoun.
We're just terrible. English is the most difficult language to translate real languages into, to be honest.
No, actually English is good. It's
you think
very
so?
Easy. Yes. Once you try Chinese, you will agree with me.
Well, which Chinese are we talking about? Cantonese or Mandarin or like simplified?
Mandarin.
Okay.
Mandarin. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're not here to talk about language, although it probably will come up at some point.
We're talking about communism.
Yeah. So we don't like communism.
No.
And the funniest thing to me, and it's something that's kind of pervasive in the national discourse, maybe in the Western discourse these days, are people without any experience with a particular thing thinking that they're experts on it. So when like if somebody had read a book about a restaurant and then somebody else had gone to that restaurant, I would probably take the latter person's opinion on how quality the food is, right? And if somebody had actually lived under communism, I think I might pay a little bit more attention to them, because I don't see a whole lot of people who were in communist countries who escaped who now are proselytizers for communism, right?
Yes, this is a very common thing, and it's really it's very alarming that so many people that believe that they know better than people who survived the actual communism, and then they feel like they can do better this time. So they were not done correctly before, but they can fix it. They can make it really work.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that what do you think that is? Just naivety or hubris? You know
No,
what I mean?
it's brainwash. It's absolutely indoctrination. And so, and you said some people just read the book and believe in it, but there are a lot of books, including the book that I just written, to tell them how bad it is. So it is indoctrination. It's absolute indoctrination from the early age, in our educational system, in the media, in our entertainment, in Hollywood. They all tell them something that is not true, that Marxism and communism is absolutely evil. They did not tell them that.
And where did all this start? Like from your perspective, I know that you were there in the Cultural Revolution in China, but yes. Like in the West, Marxism has been like kind of the alternative, I guess, to some degree for the how would you put this? Just how corporations can be dicks as well, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like there's two sides of the same coin there. With corporate and government and how they can oppress people in some situations. But it seems like we have this predilection as human beings to, when something's wrong, to go as far in the opposite direction as we possibly can, instead of just finding out what's reasonable and doing that.
Yeah, communism come into being because it was against capitalism. So and that's in the 20th century that this become something that a lot of people believe that can replace capitalism, especially in the Karl Marx time. That he saw this proletarian, the landless, the only choice they had is to work in the factory. And he believed that they were exploited, that the system is evil, the system will be destroyed by the rising proletarian. But it did not come true, because capitalism actually created wealth, then created middle class. And so that did not come true. So that's part one of the story. But now we are not here facing the proletarian rise up against the capitalism system. We are experiencing something different. We are experiencing the cultural Marxism.
Yeah, so the two very different things, economic and cultural, for sure. I want to stick on the economic part for just a second because I think it's helpful in
Mm-hmm.
understanding the real motivations. There's an old saying in English literature that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't know if you've heard that particular phrase
Yes, yes,
before,
yeah.
but it's, anytime somebody shows up with a too good to be true solution to a problem, almost invariably they're trying to take advantage of you, right? To extract your labor,
Yeah.
your wealth, or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just to oppress you
Yeah.
generally. And certainly economic Marxism has it's been shown pretty handily that it's nonsense, right? It just doesn't work. That kind of unmotivated workforce with labor constantly extracted from them just doesn't work. And the proof is in the pudding. China has not become more economically Marxist over the years. They've become more capitalist, right? Quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit so, as a matter of fact. So, but then I look at our country in the West here in America, United States, and it's like, it seems like our form of capitalism is trending too far in the other direction in the same way that, Marxism did from capitalism earlier in
Mm-hmm.
the late maybe 19th century. And we're getting back to it seems like just a very sophisticated form of feudalism where there's still, wealthy and powerful people, maybe corporations that are taking advantage of and extracting labor and wealth from people. And I wonder, because if we're going to criticize Marxism for going in the opposite direction, I feel like we need to be careful that we don't overcorrect in the other one, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're talking about economics, which
Mm,
is not really the focus of my book.
sure.
My book is culture, but I can tell you that Marxism and communism will always be appealing to a lot of people because it gives you this utopia vision that everything will be fixed, that the world is full of oppression and full of exploitation, and we have something else that can fix the problem. But I think just forget about economics or culture, whatever. The best way to understand communism and Marxism is it is all about power. It is about totalitarianism. It's about control. And so that's why it did not like a capitalism. Capitalism basically is a system that gives you choice. You have the choice not to work for a evil capitalist, right? You have the choice
Mm,
to have your own business. That is absent in communist system. The government, the state controls everything, and so the end result is really is it's everyone were equally oppressed.
mm.
Everyone was equally miserable and poor. That's the end result of capitalism of communism, and people need to understand it.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point. It is about power ultimately, and it's
It's about absolute about power. Yeah,
leveraging people's fears typically, right? Like, well,
or
there's
desire,
yeah, or desire, yeah,
or
either way.
greed.
Mm,
This time I say greed of people who want others, want their neighbors' stuff.
mm-hmm.
That is human greed. That capitalism, that communism capitalize on that and say, "I will give you that. You follow me, I will get your neighbor's stuff and give it to you."
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's definitely going on here in the States right now, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to jump back to the cultural revolution since we're talking about cultural Marxism. Can you give me a sense of what it was like in China before the Maoist revolution began, and then kind of your experience as it went along? I mean, because it was a lot of brutal things happened, but it seemed like they happened in phases, and a lot of people, criticized Mao for allowing famines that killed 50, 60 million people, however many, and
Yeah.
whether those were intentional or not. I mean, it's hard to say from just reading books because who knows, right? But
Yeah.
just from your perspective, I want to know how that all went down.
Okay, so we're going back a lot,
Yep.
right? We're going back to the 20s and
Mm,
30s and 40s. Okay, so communism come to China because it was appealing to a lot of people. So CCP and Mao especially realized that the kind of a classic Marxism they import into China won't work because China most of them were peasants, landless peasants. And so Mao actually, that's what they call it. They made a contribution to Marxism's revolution. So he said, well, okay, so we don't have factory workers to mobilize, but we have peasants. That 90% of the population was in China was peasantry. So he mobilized them and he promised them. Promised them what? What they want the most, land. So he said, follow me, support my revolution, and when we succeed, you're going to get free land. And that's what really worked for Mao is the peasant support. So in 1949, he successfully got power, took over China, and right away, he started the campaign called land reform because he has to really realize the promise he made for the peasants. The land reform was one of the most brutal campaign. And he did not just take the land from the landlord and give to the poor peasants. No, no, no. They have to get the land through class struggle. So the peasants were coached to understand this alien concept that they never really understood. And so they were taught the reason you are poor, not because you are not smart, not because you're lazy. You are poor because the landlord exploited you. Your unhappiness, your misery, your poverty, all because of the people that were with land. So they started this class struggle, and during the process, 2 million landlords were executed or killed or brutalized by the peasants. That's how they get the land. And from doing that process, and Mao really codified this class label for every Chinese. So he had like 5 categories. If you're a landlord, rich peasants, you're the enemy of the state. If you are middle class, peasant, or lower middle, or proletarian, you are the red class. And that's how Mao really weaponized political identity and divided China into 2. And so ever since then, that become the core of the CCP's tactic to keep people divided and keep people fighting each other. So, okay, move forward. 5 years later, so that was 1949 to 1951, and then they distributed land to the poor. 5 years later, in 1958, 6 years later, whatever, all the land were taken back by the state through the collective farming campaign called People's Commune Campaign. So there goes, you can get free land from the government, but the government can take it away anytime. So that's what happened during the People's Communes campaign. All the land were taken back by the state, and the peasants were told, you're not landless. You are the owner of all the land. Yeah. Everybody owned the same thing. So, and of course, they know. They were not that stupid. They know that means nobody owns anything. And it's the state that owns everybody and everything.
Wow. Well, if that sounds familiar to anybody out there, it's kind of happening now. And it's very true. Anything a government gives you, they can take away.
Or take it back.
That's why we say, the government doesn't grant you rights. I mean, we write documents to recognize natural rights, but the government doesn't have the ability to grant anybody rights. This thing that you're explaining is at the core of what's been happening in the West since the 1950s, probably here in the U.S., especially in the 1950s.
Oh, I think earlier, before that. This is something people need to know, that a lot of people have this misconception that all this craziness, all this Marxist and communist narratives and agendas come from China. No, it has been here. And it has been here since 1919. So the Russian Revolution took place in 1970. CP Communist Party USA, was founded in 1919, and the Chinese Communist Party was founded in 1921. So communism, Marxism has been here since the beginning. And what we see here now is the works of the American communists for decades.
And so it's I guess it should be no surprise then that every social movement that's happened in the United States has adopted a lot of this Marxist ideology over the years, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
because of
Yes.
it, as you put, it's very attractive, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea of it is attractive to people who are uninitiated, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the civil rights movement and more recently labor movements as well, and more recently the social justice movement. But it does seem like you break this down really well in the book about Marxist tactics, and I think a lot of people have seen Yuri Bezmenov's kind of breakdown of that whole situation, a former Soviet intelligence officer that kind of explains what their pathway was. But this was just from the 50s or 60s on. But this, you're right, it has been pervasive in the culture since
Yes.
maybe even since the late 19th century in the labor movement, because it certainly was in England, right? In the
Yeah.
UK, in the UK, there were a lot of communists floating around in the labor movement right before and
Yes.
right after the World War One. But at any rate,
Mm-hmm.
the crux of all this is division, right? It's
Division.
to split people up into a couple of different groups, maybe hopefully just two groups if you can do that. But if you can have more than two, that works, and then
Oh, yeah.
convince them that the other people are evil,
Yeah.
whether that's true or not, right? So we end up like, it reminds me of this poem somebody wrote about ants in a jar. I'm sure you've heard of that one as well. But if you put like black ants and fire ants in a jar together, they'll go about their lives and ignore each other. If you shake the jar, they think the other one attacked them, and they'll kill each other, right? But
Yeah.
they never ask who shook the jar in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly they have to do. They depend on it. So in China, it's class, and that worked. So because Chinese are all the same people, share the same history, same language, so they go by class. And here they tried that too, but Bernie Sanders still is the old school Marxist. He's still trying to do this 1% versus 99%. Even though in the process, and he become one of the 5%, so he dropped 5%. He now it says 99 versus 1%, but that really is not going to work that well. So they have to go to they have to find other ways. Of course, race, gender, sexuality, and it goes on and on and on. And so now we have anyone who can come up with another identity, then they can claim to be the victim. What is victim? The victim basically is the new proletariat, right? And so they are against the other side, who were now regarded as the bourgeois or the oppressor. So this is a whole thing is worked on I call it the operating system of oppressors versus oppressed. So that's why the students or the leftist activists would go and support Hamas terrorists. Why? Because they operate on the same principle: oppressors versus oppressed. Basically, they identify someone as a victim, no question asked. It's virtuous, need their support. Anyone that they identify as oppressor, evil.
Yeah, that's
Very
man,
simple.
that's a really good way to put that. The victim is the new proletariat. I haven't heard anybody
Yeah.
say that specific phrase before. That makes a lot of sense. But the interesting difference this time is during the Cultural Revolution, it was class, right? Because there's a homogeny. Everybody's the same race, speak the same language. And then in America, I mean, yeah, class worked a little bit for a while. And then race
Yeah.
worked a little bit for a while too, but then people stopped caring about that. So we had to define a new level of victimhood with like microaggressions and shit like that. And then,
Yeah.
of course, this is what happened, but there was so much social currency attached to victimhood because of this operating system, as you call it, that people started to dive into their own identity and try to find ways to become a victim, which is completely antithetical to cognitive behavioral therapy, the way that you teach somebody to be a strong, resilient adult human being, right? I mean, this is the
Yeah.
opposite of that.
Yeah. So they are in search, they are victims in search of identity. And I just watched lately that just past few days in TikTok, there's a lot of young American kids want to become Muslim. And really, seriously, do you think they really understand Islam and they want to really become take that as their faith? I think a lot of them just want to be a victim. So they have hijab, especially for girls. For men, you can't do much. For the girls, they just put hijab, and then they become a victim. And so it's just as simple as that. So everyone seems to be searching for identity that they can claim. So they become the victim. Once you become the victim, you become the virtuous person, and you become the person that you are always right. And then you become the person basically with power.
So what's the end state there, I guess? Is it just to keep people, I mean, from the I guess from the leadership perspective, is it just to keep people? Well, this is my opinion. You tell me what you think about this. I think it's to keep the lower class angry and distracted, and to keep whatever you want to call the middle or upper class from becoming too powerful, right? Because if people have upward mobility, then they challenge the leadership, right? Like if it's the CCP,
Well,
they don't look at what they did to the guy that owns Alibaba, right?
yeah,
He got a little out of
Jack
line
Ma,
talking
yeah,
shit, and he
yeah,
just disappeared for a little while. I'm sure he was at a re-education camp or something, right? So it's like
yeah.
they don't want anybody that isn't 100% loyal to the party to become too powerful. So I think it's both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, I think mainly what I see it is a way to divide people, to constantly divide people, and then make basically they want people fight with each other. That is the goal. How do you control a large population? You control by dividing them. And so, and you know, in Mao's China or in CCP's China, they always set the majority against a group of minority. They always identify a small group of people and then have the whole majority go against that minority, even though that minority keep changing, and anyone can become part of that minority. But here it's the opposite. It's they set up a minority going against the majority. You know, they by race and
Mm.
by whatever, it's a small group because America still, even though it's not as strong as before, we still have a middle class. So they are going against the majority. That's, I think, for that reason, they have to desperately always expand their victim group. So now being fat is you can identify yourself as a victim.
Sure.
So it's just it goes on and on and on. And so anyone can be a victim, and anyone want to be a victim, and that's the problem.
Well, how do you think we become more resilient against that? Because it is in the same way that Marxism, generally speaking, throughout the years has been attractive to naive people. This, and include with this the social media having a camera pointed at yourself all the time these days, right? I think that definitely helped escalate this problem with Marxism. But how do we become more resilient against that when it is so attractive for people to dive into their identity and self-select into victimhood like that?
Well, that is really, I will use the term that Hillary Clinton used, deprogramming. Of
Mm.
course, she was talking about deprogramming people, re-educating people that she disagree with. But I would say the same thing. We have to deprogramming those people who have been programmed with Marxist ideology. And so that's why I wrote my book, is to tell them, and what you are in, you think you're on the right side, and the Marxists and communists did the same thing in China, and what is the result of it? And so they don't know because they never learned the history. So I would say that Marxism is attractive to many people for different reasons. There's people that who want free stuff,
Mm.
Those are the LC's customers, right? They want government to take so that they can do as little but get as much
Hmm.
other people's stuff. Those are the group, but those are the probably not as well educated, probably not well, just put it, they're not the well educated, but we see a large group of well educated um, young people or not young people. They believe in that too. Why? I think that gave them the need to feel virtuous. They feel like if they support the the narrative, such as LCs or the Democratic Party in general, they are helping those who need help. So they become the virtuous one. So a lot of them were attracted to the left ideology because they really feel that's how they become a better person.
Hmm.
And then there's another group. Those are the real ones. They know by supporting that they get power,
Hmm.
such as Ihan Omar. You know, they get power. So I think there's different people attracted to the Marxism and the communist ideology for different reasons, and we have all of them.
Yeah, there's a so I tell people this all the time because a lot of our listeners ask like, well, how do I, how do I fight back against this? Because it's not like the problem with the cultural revolution is there's no actual war to fight. It used to be simple, right? Some
I know, I
some
know.
some dick would come into your area and try to take over your shit and be like, "No, we're not doing that." You would literally have a fight with them to decide who gets to
Yeah,
stay there. Now it's like it seems like any kind of violence seems like an overreaction to something like this, and maybe it is, right? So you have to like you have to be more resilient as communities, right? So what I tell people is that the best way to prevent stuff like this from happening is one to act more locally, right? When the government shows up,
yes,
if nobody has their hand out, then there's no power to be had there, right? Because you trade your liberty for security and comfort. Now, Ben Franklin warned us about this in the 1770s. And that means that this need to resist, like a philosophical, political need to resist, was articulated 100 years before Marxism was even a thing, right? So it isn't like this has always happened through all of human history, whether it is King John refusing to enforce the Magna Carta and allowing more feudalism, or the many other examples in Rome and things like that over the years. This isn't a new idea. Like we know that individual liberty and the exercise of it is what like protects us from this nonsense, right? But it still seems like there's so many people willing to, for a couple of bucks or not having to worry about where their next meal comes from, will cede their independent authority to anybody that'll come along and give them that stuff, right? And
I
it's
yeah.
a that's wild to me. I can't understand how somebody could do that.
I think one of the ways to wake those people up, to deprogram them, is to teach them real history. Okay, so the real history of communism, there are plenty of lessons. Okay, so I will just tell the stories
Hmm.
of what happened in China. Look at those peasants, right? They believed that they can get the free stuff if they help Mao and the CCP to win the revolution, and they did. They got free land for what? For 5 6 years, and then all the land were taken away. Not It did not stop there, and then the Mao, through Mao's great leap forward, disastrous policy, up to 50 million of those peasants died of starvation. So this happened in all communist countries. Those people want free stuff. They all end up with nothing. And a lot of them lost their lives. It happened in Soviet Union, it happened in China, and it happened in Cambodia. Okay, so that is what happened. So if you know history, you will understand. You may have some free stuff in the beginning, eventually you end up have nothing. Okay, for the second group of people, those are the virtuous people, right? They
Hmm.
want to support the revolution because they think they're helping the poor, and there are plenty of history lesson to regard what happened to those people. those people become the problem of the new regime because they were kind of like true believers. They kind of believe what they're doing is to help the poor or to help the weak. They were the first one to go. That the new regime would not tolerate them because they take their cause too seriously. Those people need to be eliminated. That's what happened in China. Those intellectuals join the revolution and they become the target. And they were the ones who were sent to the gulags or prison or graves. So, and only those that are in power and eventually get power, but that's not it, because eventually they're going to fight over each other because the power they got is through what? It's really through the very, very evil tactics, by deception, by violence. So eventually they're going to fight each other. So what happened in China is that the number 2 figure of CCP, President Liu Shaoqi, was persecuted to death by Chairman Mao. Why? Because Chairman Mao regarded him as a threat. So this is going to end up bad for everybody. For those who want free stuff, for those who want to become virtuous, or for those who want power. They all end up bad. The only winner will be the most ruthless person. And eventually, that, like Stalin, like Mao, they always worry about being assassinated. They will never live in peace, and that is the story of communism in short.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Russia as well. Stalin was pretty well known for any leader in his inner circle that got too powerful amongst the people, he would just have them executed, right? And Saddam Hussein did that shit too in Iraq for years. Yeah, I mean, and I think Putin does that today, right? If anytime anybody that's critical, too successful in Russia or critical of the Russian regime gets, they just fall out of windows miraculously now. It's like, all right, we know what's going on there.
People absolutely need to know the history. And so when they understand what communism is really about, they will really wake up and say the communism, as I explained, is really about control. It's really about totalitarianism, because the government grant you the rights, whatever that right, you can do this, but you cannot do that. And that is absolutely the opposite of what this country was built on. And our founders were the first one to build this country on the principle that our rights are not from the government, but from our creator. And this is a concept that is foreign to millions, hundreds of millions of Chinese, because that's not in our tradition. That is not in many of the faith tradition. It is exclusively coming from Christianity.
Well, we had that problem in Iraq as well when I was over there, trying to explain the concept of just self-identity, stuff that isn't directly involved either with religion through Islam or the state specifically, right? Like this idea, especially when they started voting, like their idea of voting was, well, this guy's the most powerful, so we just go and vote for him. And that's why, like, people say that Saddam cheated on the elections because he was getting like 98% of the vote. I don't think that's true. I think they were so fucking brainwashed that they were like, oh, he's the most powerful guy, that's who you vote for, right? That's how they understood the political system. And then we show up, a bunch of blue-eyed white dudes, is like, hey, democracy, and they're like, we don't know what the fuck that means. You know what I mean? That and it wasn't, not in a rude way. They just had no concept of that. So we were extremely naive.
Yeah, that's absolutely the truth. And to have a republic like United States, you have to have the soil. Where is that soil? The soil is those the tradition, the belief system. And when it's not there, you can't just export the so-called democracy to a place like China. Even today, people just don't understand. The people still believe in all their power
Mm.
is granted to them by their government.
That's really sad, you know. And it's, you know, what will be interesting is I don't think it really took hold in Iraq that much, but in Afghanistan, those folks got a taste of like individual liberty that I don't think they've ever had before, and I think it's going to get rocky there if the Taliban continues. It's hard to unring that bell when somebody understands that there's the possibility that through their own action they can become successful and not just because of some external entity. It's hard to unring that bell, you know, downstream.
But we need to ring the bell here
Mm.
for those indoctrinated people that if you let go and if you let go our liberty and freedom, and you think that the government should be the one to shut this person up, to shut that person up, you will be the next. And that's something that people just don't understand.
Yeah, there's a famous poem about that, right? First they came for the socialists, and I was in the socialists, so I didn't stand up. And
Yes.
then they came for the labor unions, and I wasn't a labor union person, so I didn't stand up. Then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, and then they didn't stand up. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to stand up, right?
It will come to everybody.
Yeah, it always
Yes.
happens that way. I don't know why.
Yeah.
What did Churchill say? Appeasement is feeding the crocodile, hoping he eats you last. You know what I mean? Like when you see,
Yeah.
you wouldn't treat a fire that way. If your neighbor's house was on fire, you wouldn't look outside and be like, fuck it. You know, that's his problem. I mean, even if you had no empathy whatsoever, a reasonable, logical person would look at that and be like, that could spread to my house too. I better go do something about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I believe that the most important thing right now is to wake up the conservatives, not to say the liberals, because the conservatives, not all of them understand what is really going on and what is the nature of woke and wokeism. It is Marxism, it is communism. And only when people really, really understand can they fight back effectively. You can't really fight back something that you don't quite understand.
Mm.
Even today, I see so many conservatives still thinking they are dealing with the old Democrats going kind of crazy. No, it is what we're dealing with is communism. Democratic Party has been infiltrated and hijacked. Now it is a communist party.
Now, you've got some very practical experience with this that a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. You were, your political career, if you want to call it that, kind of began with a speech at the political activism career, excuse me, began with a speech at the Loudoun County School Board, which we all know is the reason that McAuliffe didn't win the governorship because of all the weird shit they were doing there and the critical race theory, DEI, so on and so forth. How did you get involved in that? And what was the message you gave to the, because you were right. I think it was in, what was that, 2021, I think that was. And
2021.
yeah,
Yes.
like I don't think that the broader public had any idea that in schools, not in like Massachusetts or New York or California, but in Texas and
In Texas, in
and
Florida.
Virginia and Florida and
Yeah.
red state, like historically red states, this stuff is going on. So
Mm-hmm.
you were starting from ground zero, and I don't think people had any idea what was going on. And then when they saw it, they were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening." But how did you get involved in that?
Yes, this is 2020 is really the turning point for me. Even though I have noticed things for a while, excuse me, I noticed like a political correctness, the division that the soul and among the American people, and the race war they rage. But it's 2020 when I saw the riots and the burnings and then the looting and everything, and I just well, there's no mistake for me. That was Cultural Revolution. That was what I experienced and witnessed growing up in China and in the Cultural Revolution. So that was the time I really, really, really feel like I could not sit back and just complain. And so that's in I think in the fall of 2020, I joined the local Republican committee and the local conservative groups. And during that time of 2020, we also get to see what was really taught in our school. The first video came out actually about they are teaching critical race theory, was also from Loudoun County.
Hmm.
This history teacher asked a student through a Zoom, and the kid was so smart, he recorded it. So this is a black student, and the teacher asked him to identify a picture and describe a picture of two girls, one black and one white. He said, two girls. And the teacher tried to guide him, said, no, give me a break. What did you see? It's a black girl and a white girl. And that went viral. And so now we see for the first time that through Zoom, what has been taught
Yeah.
to our kids.
Yeah.
And that's the reason.
Not just what they were teaching, but the super sneaky way that they were doing it. Because
Exactly.
they weren't. It wasn't in social studies or a history class of some other sort where they were like, here's all the oppression that's happened over the years and why you as a white person should feel guilty. No, they were inserting it into like math word problems and shit like that.
Everything. They can talk about pizza, and then they talk about critical race theory. So anyway, that's when I just decided that I have to do something. So I went to the school board, and so I said what I said, and I compare the CRT to the Cultural Revolution, and so I thought I just did what I need to do to be an activist in my own county, and I had no idea that it went viral.
Yeah.
And then I found myself on the spotlight, national spotlight, and then become an accidental activist. And I have been active since then. And in 2022, I finally decided I need to write a book. So I quit my job in March of 2022 and spent the whole year writing this book. And so now I've become a full-time activist. My mission is to really educate American people and to tell them the history that they never learned, and then tell them that it is history repeating right here in America.
Yeah, a big part of this, by the way, and this was the case. This has been the case for a long time, but weaponizing youth against the public, and I think it does two things. One, it's like the same reason that companies advertise to kids to make a lifelong customer, right? So you get them before they're able to create a sophisticated like mental defense against this stupid ideology, but also because young people have, once they come into their own as young adults, they have they apply a lot of pressure to the older generation to develop these people that you call like philosophers and educators and things like this who think they're doing the right thing. But that would be what, Marxism would call a useful idiot, right? Essentially. Yeah. But how, I wonder, because there was no social media back then, and the education system was already controlled entirely by the state in China back then. But what are the parallels? Like, how is it similar the way that America's youth is being used and weaponized right now versus how it was back then? Or is it pretty much the same?
Yeah, I detailed that in my book. And the Cultural Revolution in China was a youth movement. And the same here in America, the woke revolution is mainly a youth revolution. How come? Because it's youth are the easiest group to mobilize, because they have been indoctrinated. They all come from the same source, government schools. They have been indoctrinated ever since they entered the system. The system has one purpose: it's not to educate the young people to become responsible, successful individuals. They have been trained to think as a group. They have been trained to become the future activists. In China, they were being trained as future revolutionaries. So when Mao wanted to launch his revolution, he did not have to use his army, because that is not the goal is not to use violence. The goal is to use the youth. And so he had tens of millions of young people and following his order and destroy everything. And that's the Chinese Red Guards. And now we have them here. We have Americans Red Guards. Those are the BMMs, the Antifa, the social justice warriors. You can see them everywhere. You can see them in school, college campuses, on the streets, corporations. They are everywhere because they come from the same place. Government controlled schools and Marxist controlled universities.
So, it started with the universities back in the day with America. And when I say back in the day, to your point from before, it wasn't the 50s and 60s. It was the 1920s when this started in the American university system, right?
Yes.
So it predates what we think of as the Red Scare and the McCarthy era by quite a bit. It's been going on for the 18 to 22-year-old for a very long time.
Yes. And those are the people that are no longer young. Those are people now in control of our institutions.
Yep. Yeah. But it didn't have the same effect until they got into the primary schools, until they started very young with this stuff.
Yes.
Like a certain percentage of people were captured by this stuff for a small amount of time, right? And it kind of goes into Churchill's maxim about if you're young and conservative, you have no heart. If you're old and liberal, you have no mind, right? Or have no brain or whatever. People, for the most part, in the boomer generation kind of grew out of that nonsense. When they started having to pay taxes, for example, right? They're like, man, I don't want to pay all these taxes. But these days, and it's
changed.
It's a brilliant move to start younger,
yeah.
right? It's a brilliant move to start it in adolescence, because then by the time they're in universities, all you're doing is reinforcing what they've been hearing for the last 12 to 15 years, right?
Yeah, I have to say, before, what you described is the old wisdom, right? Because they were taught, they need to help the poor, they need to help the marginalized people. Not today. They were taught they need to destroy this system. They need to overthrow the foundation of this country. It totally changed in nature. So today, and what they're taught is no longer what you were taught when you were young. So we are really dealing with a Marxist revolution. So I tell everybody, wake up. We are in the midst of a war reached to us. And the goal is not to improve this, help that. The goal is singular, to destroy this country, burn it to the ground, and then build back, not better, but build back totalitarian.
Yeah, I mean, it seems really obvious. The words they use these days, maybe they were more subtle back in the day, but the words they use now, like destroy the patriarchy, which is just code. Yeah, it's just code. Destroy the patriarchy is code for destroy America. And then, even worse is this idea of decolonization. That just means murder. That just means killing the people that are in a certain place to get them out of power. That's what that means.
Yeah.
So we're using these euphemisms now, but I don't know how much longer we'll be using euphemisms, because it seems like leftists are becoming more and more violent. And not just are they becoming more and more violent, or at least in practice, but they're becoming more and more accusatory, trying to make it seem like conservatives are the real violence, right? It's a very smart move, to be honest.
Yeah. And I really hope that my book will wake up a lot of people. And again, I say the same thing again. When you know history, you can understand the present. If you don't, you basically, if you don't know history, no matter how old you are basically born yesterday, because you have no clue what happened before. And you have no clue that history is being repeated.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's the old phrase? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, boy, I like the idea of educating people. We're getting a lot of resistance from that. People are pretty entrenched in their positions right now, and it's. I think
I know.
Yeah. So from your perspective, because this is what you do, I want to know like for the everyday person out there who has kids, who works in a workplace, who has to deal with this shit, or who's kids are in college or something, or who they are. A lot of them are in college, or they work in. I mean, even the military is pulling a lot of this bullshit lately. So I wonder, from your
Yeah.
perspective, like how do you see people handling that to push back? You know what I mean, in a way that makes sense to defeat this nonsense.
Well, a lot of people still want to just ignore it and say just mind their own business, but they can't ignore it. It happened everywhere. It happened in their workplace. It happened in their children's school. And then the children come home and remember during 2020, the kids come back to school and demand their parents to donate for BMM. If not, then they are racist. So they brought all this back to your home and also in your workplace. If you were white, you were condemned as having white privilege, and then you see your kids like Asians, they have been like most of them not politically involved, and then they see that their kids could not go to Ivy League schools or good prestigious high schools or whatever because they are Asian and they are the white adjacent. So all this happening to them, and that's how they started to wake up because it really get to them rather than over there, you know. So in the process, I think that they will understand that there's something wrong with the left and what they are pushing. And but my book, I really at this point I think if I can wake up all the conservatives, it will be a huge success because when conservatives understand it, then we can really, really fight back effectively. Now, you know, we get discouraged, but the conservative is just not very organized, not very firm in their pushback of the left. I think a lot of them just really have no idea they're fighting against communists.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's look at how many people, for example, allowed lockdowns, allowed vaccinations that they didn't agree with, and they did that just to keep their job or their status or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like that, that can't be the case. This is what it's. I've talked about this on the show before, but this idea of passive resistance from the civil rights movement, that's not what it was. It's an old Indian Hindu principle called satyagraha, right? And what it means is I'm going to do the right thing and accept the consequences no matter what they are. Now, as an individual, that can be difficult because the weight of the government can come down hard on you, right? But as a group, like the more people who are saying no, the more resounding and effective it is. Yes. And that is what, yes, from my perspective, I think that's the most important thing people can do right now. One, like you said, be educated about this stuff in a way that's meaningful. But two, have the courage to, you know, stand arm in arm and look at the government and say no. Right? Or institutions or whomever it is trying to push this nonsense. It isn't always from the government. There's NGOs that do this stuff, educators, things like that. But
it is this force. Yeah. This is, you know, it's not just from, not just from top, from everywhere, from left and the right. And yes, it is this ideology that so infiltrated this country that there's so many people that have been indoctrinated for decades. And that we're really fighting this world view. You know, they look at through things through what I call Marxist lens, and so we're really talking fighting something that is in people's mind, and it's not easy. It's not easy because we let that happen for decades. Now we're dealing with the result, so it won't be easy. But as long as we understand what we're dealing with, if you don't push back now, we are really giving up our liberty and our freedom, and we live in a totalitarian state. And you have no right. You can't. You have no right to free speech. You have no right to arm yourself. You become a slave.
Yeah, I like that you use the word force because in Hindi, Satyagraha literally means truth force, right? It's the force of truth. It's the power that truth has. That's what it means. And I equate it to the balance between gravity and nuclear fission in a star. So gravity's pushing this thing together, right? All these hydrogen and helium atoms together, they're fusing together, they're having huge bursts of energy, and the only thing that holds that thing together is gravity, but it's a balance, right? There's always going to be predators in the world. There's always going to be struggles for power. There's always going to be external tormentors. There's always going to be internal threats. The thing that protects us from that is resilience, and there is no resilience without truth.
Yeah, yeah.
Look,
It's a really right now we're engaged a war between evil, good and evil, really, truth and lies.
well, I hope that I'm on the side of the truth. I feel like I am, and I know you are. Your
You
book is
are, we
called,
are, we are.
I know we are. Your book is called Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning, and it's all about the history of the Cultural Revolution and how it's basically playing out in the, not basically, how it is playing out in the United States
Yeah,
right now. Not just the
yeah,
United States and other Western countries as well, but we're talking about the United States here. You can buy this
Yeah.
book on Amazon. There's an audiobook, so if you're an Audible person as well, I highly recommend you guys go out and purchase this. It is, if you want to understand the attack that's happening on our country and on Western civilization and how it's been happening for a very long time, how it's happened before, and how it's played out in other countries and why we have to fight this, you need to read this book. So it's Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning by one of my favorite authors lately. This is one of the best books I've read in a long time because the book is good, obviously, but it's so on time. Like we need this right now. So I appreciate you writing this, and I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. And tell everybody where they can find you another place. You're on Twitter and stuff like that too, right?
I'm on Twitter. Please follow me because I tweet almost every day, and my tweet is full of parallels because that's what I do. Tell people this is history repeating. So my X handle is X. It's my name, X XVANFLEET.
Yeah, I like that. The parallels. There's a reason Jesus spoke in parables, right? It's because it's easier to understand.
Yes.
You get the idea and then you can map it onto other stuff and see stuff better.
Yes.
So definitely give her a follow as well. And look, thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.